Thank you for watching and listening to Breakfast with Ellie and Martin.
And let's take a look at the front pages now.
On the front page of The Times this morning, attention is dedicated to Harry's spilling of secrets in his new memoir.
The Guardian focuses on unions attacking Rishi Sunak's plan to sack workers who break strike rules, as well as Harry's recent revelation that he was attacked by his brother William.
As with most of the front pages this morning, the Mail reports on Harry's new memoir, including details of his declaration that he killed 25 Taliban fighters. Pretty extraordinary. Well, time to go through the papers now, and joining us this morning is radio broadcaster and DJ Liz Kershaw, as well as Deputy Editor of Spite, Fraser Myers. Good morning to you, Liz. Good morning to you, Fraser. Hi. Joining us. Lots to go through today. Fraser, let's start with something we really cannot avoid this morning.
Yeah.
Prince Harry's revelations.
So Prince Harry's book has been leaked early, or it's come out early in Spain by accident or design. We don't quite know.
What happened there? Do we know?
It seems as if it's got into Spanish bookshops a little bit early. It's not supposed to come out till next Tuesday, and obviously every newspaper has sent someone to get a copy of the book, have it translated immediately so we can read all the juicy revelations. And it's obviously screwed up the Sussex's plans, because Harry was going to be doing these soft soap interviews on ITV on Sunday and on CNN in the US, and now it's kind of spoiled the party. But the revelations are actually pretty sensational.
Yeah.
I mean, anyone who sat through the boring 6-hour Netflix stuff will have been bored to tears, because there was no new revelations, just moaning, the usual stuff about racism. But here we learn so much, or at least we learn what Harry thinks. We're told a lot. So we hear about Harry talking about how his brother knocked him over, he fell onto a dog bowl. We've heard about Harry losing his virginity behind a pub to an older lady. We've heard about Harry taking cocaine and saying he did it to upset the establishment. We've heard that Harry and William warned Charles not to marry Camilla because she could have been a wicked stepmother. And we've even learned that Harry said he killed 25 Taliban fighters when he was in Afghanistan. So there's so much to
on that final point, something that's kind of got us going this morning. Liz, I know that you and I spoke about this before we came on the show this morning. You know a lot of people. Your family serve at war. Is this really the sort of thing that dignified soldiers should be talking about?
First of all, just very briefly, I loved Harry when he was taking drugs and going to clubs.
The Las Vegas years.
I thought, what a great guy. and also, I met Camilla, and I thought, she's great. I could go to the pub with her and be out there all Sunday afternoon. Yeah. But I don't know why they would object to it. More on that later. But the military aspect of it, last night, my immediate thought was, what? He said that? That is so distasteful and irresponsible. And I can only hark back to, my uncle was in Northern Ireland, and he was in Aden in that conflict. He never spoke about... He did bring back a rifle that he told my mum had taken off a dead person in Aden. But my granddad was in North Africa he was away from home for 6 years, and he used to have a party piece where he'd say, he was in the desert with Montgomery, and he said, his big story was, and Monty said to me, this one he'd had a few, Monty said to me, Wally, you can go home now, lad, you've killed enough Germans. But it was said in that context. But he never spoke about it, and he used to go into, after he'd retired particularly, he'd sit there and he'd just go into deep, dark places and depressions. And he only ever once opened up to me not long before he died and was actually crying and telling me about an incident when they progressed from North Africa through Greece and Italy and in Athens, and he told me about an incident there where a lot of people had been killed, a lot of his comrades, and he had a pouch full of curled up black and white photographs that he'd taken along the way. But he never spoke about it. I've often listened to people talking about, I've got PTSD.
Yeah.
And I thought, those guys of my granddad's generation were absolutely screwed up mentally by what, and the people in the First World War going mad from shells. And they never moaned about it, never spoke. But they would never have boasted about how many Germans.
Precisely.
And the one time that he went to Germany was in the 70s when my mum and I, we took him to Germany, and we left him on a bench in a park, and we went to sightsee or shop, and we came back, and it was the most moving sight which I'd just like to share. My granddad was sat on a bench, and I know you're doing hugging in a bit, and this old guy the same age, they were a German, they were just hugging each other and both crying, and like they were saying, they didn't speak each other's language, but they were more or less saying to each other, it was, we didn't want to do it.
Fraser, I just want to quickly throw this back to you, because as a member of the press, Harry has turned his guns, quite often on the paparazzi, the intrusive aspect. Now, the Taliban on his back. What kind of guy would put his family in danger like this?
Yeah, I mean, it is worth recalling that, Harry's main complaint over the years is the press are invading my privacy. And he's here revealing something so unbelievably private, potentially dangerous, as you say. The press, to its credit, when Harry was in the army, kept that totally quiet. They kept that secret. They kept that secret until he'd left, worrying about his safety. And now he goes and says something that, as you say, could endanger his own life. But that's the sort of level of, his willingness to share all, this kind of almost Californian kind of oversharing, has reached that extent. It's really, really worrying.
OK, Liz, let's go back to one of your stories now. Good news ahead. It looks like we might be at an end of the nurses' strike, meeting halfway on pay, according to today's Times.
Yeah, the leader of the nurses' union has said that, OK, we'll forget the 20%, we'll go for talks on 10%. This is basically because inflation's coming down. It was easy for Rishi Sunak to promise that of his £5 a day, one of his £5 a day the other day, because he knows damn well it's reversing petrol prices. You've reported this morning. Such food bargains yesterday in the supermarket. So the inflation rate will be down, and the wage rise is based on inflation plus X%. So that will be around 10%.
Do you think nurses should get 10%? Is that a fair pay rise for their work?
Well, I accept what the leader of the union is saying, which is in reality they've lost real income of 20% over the last 12 years. And obviously, somehow that should be made up. But as long as the NHS is spending their money so irresponsibly, and we've had more examples of it this week. We've had the Rotherham councillor who had to resign because he did and played a major part in covering up Asian grooming gangs of 1,500 girls. He's now head of one of these diversity jobs I was talking about on here last week. He's now head of diversity and inclusion, etc. for England. How do you get a job like that?
And all those jobs should be gone. Fraser, do you think nurses are worth 10%?
Yeah, I think they're worth more than that. I thought the 19%. It sounds like a big number, but it was reasonable. Anything less than inflation is a real terms pay cut, and they've had their pay frozen for years. And nurses are valuable people. We want to keep them on. We want more of them. We want to attract people into the profession. So it seems perfectly reasonable that people should demand more pay. And people across the country have had their pay squeezed. This isn't just a public sector issue. I think some people in the private sector ought to go on strike as well and ask for some more money, because we've had the biggest squeeze in living standards, I think, in the past couple of years since the Napoleonic Wars, which is extraordinary. So pay needs to go up.
Yeah, and people's support for nurses is high. It's well into 60%, way above unions. Well, let's rail workers striking, for example.
I don't like the romanticisation of it to some extent, because of so firefighters do a great job as well. Ambulance drivers. Anyway.
Well, that brings us on to your
that brings us on nicely, doesn't it?
So the PM is planning new union-busting reforms, essentially asking for a kind of minimum service level during strikes. I mean, this is essentially forcing workers to become scabs, as they call them, in the kind of union terms. I think this is quite worrying. I think, there's a lot of already unions in this country have a lot more restrictions to contend with than in most other comparable European countries. The unions aren't really all that powerful anymore. This isn't the 1980s. It's not France. It's not the the 1980s, not the 1970s. You know, some of the quotas, you know, the thresholds that they have to hit in terms of votes in this country, most of our MPs wouldn't meet them. You know, the reason we have this wave of strikes at the moment is because the cost of living squeeze is really that bad, and people are feeling the pinch.
It's interesting to see that Keir Starmer has already set his stall out early, so if Labour get in, he will just like strike those anti-strike rules away, but then he would do that, wouldn't he? Because the unions bankroll Labour.
Well, yeah, and it's what it says on the tin, but the Labour Party no longer is. Labour should be representing the people who all they've got to offer is their labour. They don't own capital. Their labour is how they, you know, put food on the table, and the Labour Party has kind of abandoned those people in recent years.
Although in the People's poll today, they are rocketing ahead. It seems, at least, that Labour seem like a shoe-in for the next election, although we've got a while to run yet.
Yeah, we know what polls are like, though, don't we? Think back to Brexit, but people get in the actual ballot box in the privacy with their own pencil, and they vote with their wallets.
I normally get told off for bringing Brexit into the conversation this time too. Let's quickly move on to your next story. Daily Star, new COVID-19 variant, surely not.
Yeah, it's supposed to be. I've heard conflicting things this week. One report said the new variant was on its way or here, and it was less dangerous and life-threatening, but it could transmit faster. And this one, it says that it's actually harder to transmit, but if you catch it, it's more deadly. The places to avoid, apparently, are the Wirral Peninsula, where I'm going next weekend. I did notice that masks were being worn in Tesco.
I've noticed that.
A lot of elderly people were wearing them. And we now have, don't we? You've got to have a PCR test to come from China.
Yeah.
It's a bit like March 2020. It's after the horse bolting the door after the horse is bolted. What I will bring Brexit into this, Martin, because it's actually relevant. So we made a decision, as did Spain and it's Italy, to test people coming in from China.
Yeah.
The EU is still trying to formulate a policy that 27 nations can agree on, and they can't. So there is no policy across the EU. So you can land in some countries without a test, others you have to be tested. They've got Schengen, so there's just open borders. They've no control over it. They cannot agree, so everything gets delayed again. I recently went to Holland and met the head of border control for Holland at a dinner party, and he said he envied us because we actually could have borders if we just implemented them, whereas in Holland he has no control at all, except at airports and the ports, over who comes and goes. But this is an example of EU just floundering, and I'm glad we can make our own decisions.
Well, Liz Kershaw, to the bitter end, a proud Brexiteer. Thanks for joining us this morning. Also, same to you, of course, Fraser Myers, and please come back in the next hour. We'll see you again then. Thank you.
Lots more to cover then.